Satoru Gojo and Sasuke Uchiha. Two characters who were once both the self-proclaimed strongest in their modern world. Each of them come from genetically blessed clans, with the Sharingan and the Limitless curse technique granting nearly unattainable power outside the 1% of the strongest who can rival them. But fighting against each other might be a bit complicated. Both Gojo's Limitless and Sasuke's Sharingan make this fight so nuanced. There's tons of factors to consider about their arsenals that are powered by their insane ocular abilities. So let's not waste any time. Sasuke Uchiha vs Satoru Gojo. Being transparent, both of these characters' attack potency and destructive power isn't all super relevant, and there's not really much to explain. But to quickly cover this section, I'm gonna start with Gojo. You could also, hit that thumbs up button down there and subscribe, but I'm just saying, Gojo far surpasses everyone within his series with the exception of Ryomen Sukuna. Despite not having many relevant statements or feats within a crossfire setting, we can backscale him from pretty much everybody else in Jujutsu Kaisen. Both Jogo and Dagon create massive environments within their domain expansions, and using this space they can create an entire island and even a mountain. Yuki Tsukumo used her curse technique Star Rage to produce her very own black hole. That black hole would have destroyed the entire planet if the barrier surrounding her and her own will didn't suppress its destructive capability. You could argue that because Gojo's stronger than Yuki and his Limitless curse technique is generally superior, he could output the same amount of power through his own technique. However, this doesn't really need to be true. Gojo remains superior and his technique is still omnipotent compared to Yuki's Star Rage because he would never get hit with this attack in the first place, or would just simply beat down Yuki before she could activate this ability. Either way, Gojo himself doesn't need to necessarily output world-destroying power to be considered the strongest, since he's far faster than Yuki and can probably defend against this attack anyways using Infinity. If you were to grant everything I mentioned so far between Dagon creating an island and Jogo creating a mountain and Yuki creating a world-ending feat that Gojo could potentially scale above, that would be considered very generous because it depends on a lot of factors that aren't really too relevant either way, because it's still not enough to compete with Sasuke. He's Naruto's rival and the repeatedly stated equal within multiple guides, some statements even referencing Sasuke as the strongest between them. Both his performance and statements drive home the undoubtable truth between both being comparable, even if you think that one is stronger than the other. Naruto at this point having one division of every tailed beast and the entire half of the nine tails, each of these monsters creating mountain nuking explosions that possibly display the curvature of the earth, even with just half of Naruto's nine tails being far stronger than every single tailed beast. Sasuke is stated and blatantly obviously stronger than the rest of the Akatsuki, with each of these members being stated stronger than one tailed beast plus their shinobi vessels known as Jinchuriki. Focusing more specifically on Sasuke, both himself and his rival Naruto struggled against Kaguya, who Hagoromo believed was stronger than everybody else including Madara. Stepping back from Kaguya, you have Madara, who can create multiple Chibaku Tenseis or planetary devastations that are even larger than Pain's. There's multiple calculations that put this feat by Madara anywhere from continental to continental plus. Sasuke easily slices through these meteors, with Naruto literally blowing them apart. Unless you believe that Dagon's domain constructed this sun that doesn't even appear within the anime and could just be an action marker, or maybe you even believe that Gojo's unlimited void actually created an entire universe, there's not really any good arguments to be made. It's pretty blatantly clear that even with this low ball for Sasuke, he's far stronger and more durable than anything Gojo has shown. But all this really isn't too relevant because Sasuke can't attack Gojo with any normal technique like Fireball, Jutsu, or even Chidori. He needs to devise some strategy that's specifically constructed to bypass the Infinity. Some could make the argument that because this technique has never prevented attacks from someone potentially much stronger like Sasuke, that this wouldn't be effective. However, because of the scientific nature and the fundamental mathematical logic behind Infinity operating, this argument slowly becomes more shaken the more you begin to understand the Limitless curse technique. Satoru Gojo's Limitless curse technique is spatial manipulation, using his six eyes to distort space on an atomic level. Within its base state, the Limitless creates Infinity. Consider this the engine for the rest of the curse technique. Other applications of Gojo's Limitless curse technique all function through Infinity or the neutral Limitless. Through various methods, each of these are amplified to create a different result. When this technique is active, objects or projectiles rapidly slow down and seemingly completely stop. After entering this barrier, they'll begin passing through the Infinity. Infinity can be simplified as the infinite division of space. Dividing space creates the Infinity effect that's operating around him. It's the concept from the tortoise and Achilles paradox. When the runner moves forward, you're going to find that the tortoise is moving half the distance. Constantly dividing any number by half will always return some other positive number. Over time, this creates an infinite sequence of increasingly smaller distances that the runner must cover to catch up to the tortoise. Gojo's Infinity uses this same concept. Infinity constantly divides the space between the caster and the object objects crossing within its barrier. While the space itself between Gojo and others is finite, Gojo can create a seemingly infinite space to travel before you end up making contact. You'll never reach the caster because the objects or projectiles will continue to travel half the distance, closer but never complete. The space between them appears endless because it's continuously being divided into smaller and smaller segments. That's infinity. It's not some key shield or some energy powered Susanoo, but instead precisely manipulating space, meaning it's problematic for Sasuke. Jujutsu Kaisen's fanbook clarifies that the clan inherited technique is actually this barrier that manifests the infinity, meaning infinity itself actually functions within this barrier that's around its caster. Gojo's barrier containing infinity could be expanded and stretched, and sometimes appearing like this bubble. That barrier can appear thinly wrapped around his clothes, making coming into contact with him and this technique nearly indistinguishable, but also sometimes stopping targets that are much farther away. Since Gojo evolved this technique, he's fixed most of its biggest evident problems. Using the reverse curse technique, Gojo can keep his brain constantly refreshed around the clock. Using the reverse curse technique creates positive energy, and unlike negative cursed energy, positive energy can be used for healing sorcerers even from devastating damage. Having reverse curse technique active on his brain accounts for the mental strain that Gojo would feel after focusing on using infinity for long periods of time, making it virtually impossible to outlast him. Infinity also has its own fully automatic passive targeting system, and objects that cross through the barrier can now be assigned a threat level based around various characteristics and properties. Using the object's mass, speed, shape, and even cursed energy can all help establish a threat level to potential attacks. Even objects like pencils and erasers without cursed energy can all be assigned a threat level and potentially slowed down and then stopped by the infinity. It's also possible that Gojo himself can assign threat levels using characteristics outside of mass, speed, shape, and cursed energy, and by using his own judgment. Assuming that there's enough time, he can likely manually assign objects or enemies in general as threatening, making nearly anything coming at him during danger situations halted by infinity. Infinity can be neutralized, and considering Sasuke is not moving at infinite speed, he's gonna have to need his own way to bypass, neutralize, or basically ignore infinity. I'll go over multiple possible scenarios and methods for bypassing infinity, finding every perfection and flaw within each interpretation. Not every method here is definitely or even possibly passing through the limitless, and I'll be going through the popular methods and strategies that I've concluded that would give Sasuke the best chance at passing through infinity. The first is Sasuke using Rinnegan Genjutsu, and depending on what form of verse equalization you agree to, changes the outcome in some situations. It's essentially just creating illusions, manipulating your opponent's nervous system and their brain into believing their new false reality. Casting Genjutsu can be done with 3 different methods, although Sasuke will be casting his Genjutsu through his Rinnegan or Mangekyo Sharingan. Visual Genjutsu is casted through the target's eyes and traveling through their chakra pathway. Here's already 2 problems. Both come down to the method for casting visual Genjutsu. Sasuke's chakra travels between himself and his opponent's ocular nerves. Infinity wouldn't allow passage. Assuming we're operating under some form of verse equalization, Infinity is designed to automatically detect and assign threats based around cursed energy. That's also assuming that Gojo wouldn't instantly identify Sasuke and this encounter as threatening before the visual Genjutsu is even casted. But that second part is up for your interpretation. Visual Genjutsu is also created by sending chakra through different pathways before manipulating the victim's nervous system. This pathway is biologically unique to the Naruto universe. Even with the standard verse equalization, Gojo wouldn't suddenly receive his own chakra network and pathway. His 6 eyes also grant extremely detailed cursed energy based sensory and vision. Gojo can visually observe the smallest details about negative energy. There's so much information in extensive detail that it can even be overly intrusive. Gojo can definitely see the chakra traveling before entering his barrier. One could argue that Gojo's RCT might make it problematic for casting Genjutsu because it's automatically running around the clock to constantly refresh his brain. Although considering what positive energy actually does, this isn't even really too relevant. Genjutsu doesn't cause damage on its own. There's no damage to repair using reverse curse technique like there would be from overusing infinity and the strain caused on his brain over time. Genjutsu can be broken with redistributing more chakra within the current tampered flow, but this Genjutsu can completely incapacitate opponents. That method for breaking through Genjutsu has also never really been effective against much stronger illusions, especially from the Rinnegan. This doesn't necessarily mean it's impossible, it's just not ever explicitly shown. Using this method to free somebody from Genjutsu also usually happens when outsiders are involved. We've never seen this strategy working with just one individual. Depending on your interpretation, Hanami's flowers potentially making Gojo off guard possibly indicates that he's more susceptible to illusions than we once realized. Using these flowers, she temporarily relaxed Gojo's instinct for fighting, probably the closest that we've seen to actual illusions within JJK. But this point is completely up for your own interpretation. Gojo doesn't really have many arguments for saving himself from Genjutsu, genjutsu. He lacks any statements and abilities to counter illusions, and that makes sense considering that it's not too relevant within Jujutsu Kaisen. His 6 eyes grant the ability to see through techniques, but this just blatantly can't be applied to all abilities. Kenjaku managed to trick Gojo's 6 eyes into believing that he was actually Geto, and Sukuna had been constantly using Maharaga's adaptation before he even realized what's actually been happening. You can speculate that maybe he just can't see through techniques that aren't completely exposed. That makes sense considering that Gojo can see through techniques like the clones that are all present with the original body but not Kenjaku's brain swapping technique that's the host within Geto's skull. That also explains Sukuna adapting Maharaga while he's hiding within his own shadow without Gojo realizing. Depending on your interpretation, something like Genjutsu, which the victim isn't clearly aware exists, wouldn't be seen through like other techniques. Using his Mangekyo Sharingan, Sasuke placed Danzo within his own illusion where Danzo believed that his technique had remained active when in reality, Izanagi had already been neutralized. Sasuke also completely paralyzed Killer B with one Genjutsu alone. He definitely has options. If Genjutsu can make it past infinity and disrupt Gojo's cursed energy flow despite not having a biological network like the Naruto verse, then he's basically finished. Otherwise, this method definitely won't make it past infinity or really affect Satoru Gojo. Using his Renegon, Sasuke can absorb chakra using the Preta Path, leading to Gojo's infinity being completely neutralized after his technique or his own reserves are completely drained. Naruto individually and every other tailed beast were all siphoned for their chakra at Final Valley. You could argue that activating absorption requires some type of physical contact, but Sasuke blatantly used this technique without any physical contact on 9 different targets at once. When Pain absorbed Naruto's Rasengan, he didn't even need to make contact with the target either. There's instead this bubble that appears around the caster, leading to absorption without direct physical contact. If you think Sasuke's works the same, then infinity should definitely be targetable. You could counter this argument by mentioning that Gojo has insane cursed energy reserves and cursed energy efficiency. Draining his reserves is definitely harder than you would think. His 6 eyes mean that he'd essentially never run low on cursed energy. Gojo uses an infinitesimal amount of energy when activating techniques. Infinitesimal meaning the lowest value that you can find nearing 0, but not exactly 0 or completely nothing. Assuming that he fights normally, then Gojo would never realistically run low on cursed energy. However, this only applies to cursed technique activation, not necessarily the amount used to maintain an already running technique. We don't know how much cursed energy Sasuke would need to drain before completely neutralizing his Limitless, but overestimating, we can say that infinity would definitely turn off when his reserves are completely empty. Gojo's cursed energy pool is seemingly limitless because of the rate of cursed energy production that far surpasses the small amounts used during technique activation. It's not actually infinite or even bottomless. According to these politicians, it's enough to energize the United States. We're not given a time frame, meaning we don't know exactly how long they figured that he could power the nation, so it's up for interpretation. But it's reasonable to assume that it's probably something longer than the short term, considering the mobilization of the military for this revolutionary opportunity. Assuming that it's 1 full year, then Gojo can generate around 100.2 quadrillion BTUs of energy. You can make the argument that because Sasuke used this technique across 9 different tailed beasts at once, therefore it would definitely be enough to drain Gojo's reserves even if they were massive. However, we don't really know how much chakra Sasuke drained. He definitely didn't drain them completely, and we also don't have any quantification for how long this could take. We don't know how much cursed energy it would take to neutralize Infinity or Satoru Gojo, and we're also missing any quantification for the rate of energy that Sasuke can drain over time. If you believe Sasuke draining even part of each tailed beast is enough, then Infinity would eventually shut down. Or if you believe that Infinity would be maintained because Gojo himself just produces way too much cursed energy too quickly or his reserves are just that massive, overall, just remember that we don't have any exact quantification. This section is completely up for interpretation. Using the Renegon to control the repulsive gravitational force generated in the caster's hand with both Almighty Push and Almighty Pull, normally sending targets flying into obstacles or potentially colliding with other abilities, making the repulsive force that's generated by the gravitational pull that much more threatening. Sasuke used this technique for both combat against Naruto and just flat out moving large areas like the 9-tailed beast sealed within the Chibaku Tensei. Despite not being able to make initial contact with him, you might think that Sasuke can just pull Gojo right out of infinity depending on your understanding of Newton's law of gravitation. Using Newton's law, we can find a counter argument against this strategy. Gravity pulls 2 masses towards each other, and its strength is described by Newton in the law of gravitation. This formula calculates the magnitude of gravitational force that 2 objects with mass exert on each other, essentially determining how strong the gravitational attraction is. Each variable within this formula represents its own and different aspect. The masses involved, the distance between them, and the gravitational constant that divides the strength of the gravity in the universe. The variable r right here in Newton's law of gravitation represents the distance between 2 masses. Gravity's strength decreases sharply as distance increases, and increases as distance decreases. In Gojo's infinity, objects are infinitely slowed down, so the distance R never truly reaches 0 but gets infinitely close. Although gravity becomes very strong as R gets smaller, it never reaches infinity because R is never 0. Therefore, gravity manipulation won't work around Gojo's infinity as the force remains ineffective due to infinity infinitely dividing space. That space would be the distance that's constantly being divided by infinity. Amaterasu or other techniques that seemingly appear on target are also possible strategies for getting around infinity. Amaterasu are the black flames that appear after making eye contact between Sasuke's Rinnegan and the targeted area. They can be controlled and shaped by his Mangekyo Sharingan using Kakasuchi. These flames continue to burn until the target is completely eradicated. They're definitely lethal against Gojo if they land. Obviously, passing through infinity is the first real problem for Amaterasu. Naruto and Gaara both use chakra-based defenses to block and even stop these flames from spreading even further. Energy-based defenses like the barrier encasing infinity will stop Amaterasu, but that's of course unless Sasuke can spawn these flames past the infinity. You'll find many Naruto scalers debating exactly how Amaterasu activates. It's contentious if Amaterasu has some set travel speed instead of just appearing on your opponent. Hypothetically, if Amaterasu has travel speed, then infinity should just be able to slow it down and stop the flames before passing through its barrier, making this strategy impossible. There's instances between Sasuke and Itachi where Amaterasu can be seen traveling, but that doesn't immediately end this discussion. You can argue that he'd be able to use his teleportation abilities to transfer Amaterasu right into infinity. Casting this technique through his Rinnegan in general opens up another debate between Rinnegan Amaterasu and Mangekyo Amaterasu. It's possible that Sasuke's Rinnegan doesn't launch this technique by traveling, but only his Mangekyo. If Sasuke's Amaterasu travels, it won't get past infinity and definitely won't be granted passage. Using teleportation to transfer or believing that Amaterasu could take down Gojo because it spawns on target is another discussion entirely. Techniques aimed directly at Satoru Gojo using some type of visual-based targeting are controversial in general. It's completely debatable what exactly you're seeing before activation. Hypothetically, if Sasuke aims Amaterasu, he might be targeting infinity instead of his actual opponent. You'll find the same problem when discussing visual-based targeting with teleportation. Sasuke might target infinity as the destination instead of Gojo himself. When looking at infinity, you're not actually looking at the caster. Technically, it's just the barrier. Here there's two counter arguments. Firstly, Sasuke's Amaterasu isn't just directly aimed at exactly what his eye targets. When trapped and completely frozen in ice, he can still aim and shape Amaterasu on his arm despite his head being fully encased. Using the logic from the counter argument made against Amaterasu appearing past infinity, this shouldn't be possible. Sasuke is not looking at his arm. He's only seeing the ice around his head and his entire body and directly in front of his Rinnegan. Some might make the argument that Naruto blocked Amaterasu, therefore it must travel because teleportation would be instantaneous movement and Naruto obviously isn't infinite speed. But obviously this argument doesn't account for the possibility that Naruto, only after being hit, simply globbed off the Amaterasu using his Kyuubi chakra. This isn't something that Gojo can do in response. Secondly, infinity already naturally exists within space. He just brings the concept into reality using the Limitless. Infinity is always present within space, meaning Sasuke would never actually be targeting the barrier since it's virtually non-existent when talking in reference to visually aimed techniques. Depending on your interpretation, there's option A, where Sasuke's Amaterasu either travels and would be instantly stopped once coming into contact with infinity. Option B, where Amaterasu activates and summons on the target but would be misdirected, appearing on infinity instead since that's the place in between Sasuke and Gojo. Or finally, that Amaterasu can be aimed even beyond exactly what Sasuke perceives, like Kaguya's ice or infinity, which is already naturally present and impossible to be targeted visually in the first place. If Amaterasu lands, it's gonna burn Gojo completely to ash and won't stop until he's completely beyond repair, even if he's using reverse curse technique. If you don't believe that he would be turned to ash despite 6-pass Naruto blocking this normal fireball jutsu, which Amaterasu would obviously burn hotter than, then he'd run out of cursed energy to power his reverse curse technique even when using the 6 eyes. Gojo's 6 eyes make it so that way the cost of activating a curse technique is basically nothing, but that wouldn't apply here because reverse curse technique isn't an actual curse technique. But obviously this all would depend on speed. Sasuke would need to be fast enough to actually take down Gojo, but this all isn't too complicated either. Kakashi was already a lightning timer even before Shippuden, literally cutting lightning itself. Sasuke should be, and pretty obviously, exponentially faster than this Kakashi, and calling him a lightning timer would honestly be heavily downplaying his speed. But overall, I don't really think we have to focus on JJK characters being that much slower than Naruto characters, because at bare minimum Sasuke is a lightning timer. Within Jujutsu Kaisen, you're gonna find arguments basing these characters and statements more consistently around Mach 3 and lightning speed. Our earliest quantifiable speed feat comes from Goodwill when Maki catches Mai's bullet. Calcs that were done prove that this bullet was traveling at nearly sometimes over subsonic speeds. However, Gege Akutami has made it clear that this feat was a little too much, and considering statements in reference to speed later on at points where Maki becomes much faster, it probably wasn't intended to signify that level of speed at least at that point in the series. Maki's power comes from her insane physical ability through her heavenly restriction, even blitzing Ogi, who previously had taken down Maki. She's undeniably much faster. Naoya had once again blitzed Maki, moving 3 times the speed of sound, or Mach 3. Any calculations done regarding characters slower than Maki that build off her bullet feet shouldn't be placed anywhere above Mach 3. It's probably not what Gege Akutami intended and exactly what he makes clear within the fanbook. After once again evolving her heavenly restriction, she's then more comfortable reacting and combating Naoya. Maki had also obtained her own form of precognition, allowing her to easily detect incoming attacks even at incredible speeds. Considering the obvious, Gojo would be faster than Maki, making him at bare minimum definitely somewhere above Mach 3. Naoya originally traveling at Mach 3 doesn't exactly serve as the ceiling or the anti-feat that stops a JJK verse from breaching beyond that limit, it's just the last explicitly stated speed feat that we're given. Obviously, Maki, along with others around her level, should be much faster, and even far surpassing this feat. Mach 3 should definitely not be the universal ceiling for JJK, especially for Satoru Gojo. Going further, these characters have also been debatably lightning timers. Kashimo's cursed energy has its own trait, sharing very similar properties to actual electricity. After setting up this technique, he can activate a lightning bolt-like attack. When activating this technique against Akari, the lightning bolt seems to travel straight towards his head before striking his right bicep. However, it's contentious. It's possible that this lightning strike wasn't aimed at Akari's head to begin with, meaning that we can't conclude on this feat. If we're being generous and giving Akari the benefit of the doubt, using this interaction, he still gets tagged by Kashimo's lightning strike and just shifted his head. Depending on what you take as canon, in the JJK anime, Toji Zenin shifted his head similar to Akari before dodging Nue's electricity. We don't actually see him dodge this attack, but considering he hadn't been damaged whatsoever and his clothes remained in perfect condition, he probably did. Maki Zenin, who's almost like the reincarnation of Toji Zenin and his stated equal, also blocked Nue's electricity. One last point before moving forward would be Kashimo's mythical beast curse technique. Activating his curse technique transformed his entire body, and pretty much anything that can be created with electricity is now fully weaponizable by Kashimo. During his fight with Sukuna, his blasts are called actual EM waves, or electromagnetic waves. These waves consist of oscillating electric and magnetic fields. These waves carry energy through space extremely quickly. Electromagnetic waves travel at the speed of light, but this only happens within a vacuum. Air is mostly empty, unlike traveling through glass or water, so very little speed is actually lost when traveling through air according to the refractive index. Electromagnetic waves moving through the air are actually 99.97% of the speed that we observe them within a vacuum. Kashimo's blasts are very close to traveling at actual light speed. Our first issue comes with the original Japanese volume release for JJK. You won't find the statement anywhere within the physical copy. Originally through the digital releases, this statement is outlined clearly that these blasts are EM waves, but that's also nowhere to be found in the paperback copies in their native language. Even Jujutsu Kaisen's strongest characters would be massively jumping from any previously established speed feat, and Gege Akutami seems to be aware of this completely. He jokes about going from infinite to Mach, seemingly agreeing with the implication that these jumps in speed are outlandish. Gege has clarified when massive jumps in his speed happened before. Maki originally being hypersonic during the Goodwill event was his first example. It's possibly why these statements aren't found within the original story's final publication. It's simply unfitting, which would be consistent. Secondly, claiming that this interaction makes him lightspeed requires two variables. Sukuna must have dodged the attack after it was fired, and the blast must obviously be actually moving at the speed of light. These blasts wouldn't be lightspeed, but incredibly close. Being generous and saying that Sukuna, while fully recovered, would have performed the same feat but even faster, we still don't have both variables. It's also possible that Sukuna dodged the blast before it actually had been fired. Using this strategy would be aim dodging. He could have seen the attack being aimed and then began reacting in response to Kashimo's movements before actually being blasted. This would in turn give Sukuna extra time to dodge the attack. Sorcerers use their own form of precognition through sensory, allowing them to predict incoming attacks and techniques. Cursed energy sparks appear before activation, and judging between different aspects between each spark can dictate and predict incoming attacks. Cursed energy being focused throughout various parts within the caster's body can also indicate incoming attacks. Kashimo's blasts definitely travel close to light speed, but they simply aren't when traveling within the air. That's also assuming that you don't already consider the volume release change as making these statements virtually non-existent, along with Gege's comment referencing large jumps between speeds being ridiculous. You would also need to assume that Sukuna isn't using any form of cursed energy sensory acting as a precognition or just flat out aim dodging. Overall, you're free to believe what you want, but this is just a bad argument. We can establish two different interpretations, one being very generous and the other one being more grounded. Firstly, being generous, Satoru Gojo is fast enough to block and dodge lightning speed attacks and movements overall. You'd believe Hikari and Maki came close to dodging their shocking encounter with these electrifying abilities, but Gojo is much faster than them, and despite not having any real quantification for how much faster, he'd be fast enough to close the gap between our close to lightning timing feats and actual lightning speed. Secondly, and more grounded, Satoru Gojo is somewhere above Mach 3. He's definitely faster than 3 times the speed of sound, and it's not his ceiling, but we have no exact quantification for how much. But Kakashi in early Naruto is already our first lightning timer, literally cutting an actual lightning bolt in half using his Raikiri. This is already speed that's potentially problematic for the entire JJK cast. Later feats pale in comparison to this that make it even worse for Gojo. The Raikage is capable of moving close to the speed of light, with other attacks dodged by Naruto like Madara Seijar Light Fang actually moving at the speed of light. In Boruto, Delta's lasers are called light beams, and Naruto can dodge them, and Kawaki can even intercept one of them. Note that these beams aren't ever explicitly stated to be light speed, but considering that they're beams made out of light, it's probably light speed. If you believe that even at worst, Sasuke is massively hypersonic while heavily downplaying him, he's still much faster than the potential lightning timers within JJK. Unless you believe that Gojo somehow outspeeds him or could compete with Sasuke because of something like speaking within the prison realm where time doesn't flow, giving him some type of infinite speed, which obviously doesn't because Gojo himself explains how time works within the prison realm, but you get where I'm going with this. Giving Gojo every argument that we could make to be faster than Sasuke, no matter how bad it is. If Gojo could actually compete with Sasuke and wouldn't be immediately vaporized by Amaterasu or caught in Genjutsu, how can he actually get rid of Sasuke? A lot of Gojo fans would instantly jump to the conclusion that Hollow Purple would instantly vaporize Sasuke on contact. But contrary to popular belief, this attack isn't just blatantly some form of durability negation or existence erasure like many claim. Sukuna and Urame are both charred by Purple and not vaporized. It's even more blatant when you account for Sukuna being hit with what is essentially a super purple that even blew up Gojo himself. Purple itself is described as imaginary mass. But within the more technical and physics-based context, virtual mass would be much more accurate. Sukuna and other characters being charred rather than deleted from existence like many believe almost immediately debunks this attack being some form of existence erasure. Satoru Gojo's Unlimited Void is probably the only thing that's capable of completely incapacitating and eventually wasting Sasuke using this domain expansion. After expansion, Gojo placed his victims within the Limitless itself, where they're forced to intake raw infinite sets of information, eventually overloading the opponent's brain. This works by forcing information through his sure hit technique within Unlimited Void. Once constructed, this automatically begins. This endless information makes the opponent feel like everything could be seen, but in reality, there's actually no end to the information, making it feel endless. When Sasuke is hit with Unlimited Void, he might start thinking of the word apple, but instead of thinking of apple, he's instead just gonna think of the letter A. And then after processing one letter infinite times, Sasuke would then process the next one and every letter after that. It's essentially just useless information. You would feel like you're close to the end, but in reality, you're much farther than anticipated. Both perception and communication and other actions that you take are forced on your life infinitely, eventually guiding you to a very slow death after being overloaded and incapacitated. Granted, expanding your domain expansion is an instant, you could argue that it's capable of capturing even Sukuna and characters of that speed, so depending on your interpretation for how fast those characters are, Sasuke could be captured. But again, that completely depends on what you think when it comes to speed. But anyways, thank you for watching.